Everybody's got an opinion on how you can run faster, but I really think it comes down to the individual and what you can achieve, what your background with running is, how many days that you run, how long you run, how far you run, how slow you run, how much consistency you have. I'm going to talk to you about these today because I'll tell you, if you're new to running, you need to hear these things. And right now I feel like I'm in the Arctic, so I got to go inside. It's so cold. Minus 22 Celsius.
Hey, my name's David, and I've been using the Maffetone method for many years. I've run marathons, ultramarathons, and 10Ks, and I think I've done pretty good at getting 3 minutes faster using the Maffetone method. However, training is never a linear line. There's always going to be ups and downs with training. And so right now, I'm kind of going through a third iteration of using the Maffetone method, or AKA slow running, whether you call it rate of perceived effort or zone 2 or Kavarvan, whatever method you follow, I believe that the same thing is going to apply when you're running slow. And there's a couple of problems, but there's also a couple of solutions and a couple of things to think about when you're talking about getting faster by running slower. So let me explain a little bit here. So there's two things to think about when running slow. One of them is cardiac drift, and it's a normal thing that's going to happen to anybody. And what happens is when you're running, whether it's hot, whether it's cool, you need to stay hydrated, okay? Because if you're not staying hydrated, I don't care if you're going out for a 60-minute run. Cheers. I have noticed over the years, cardiac drift will affect me if I'm running longer than 45 minutes. There's just all of a sudden, it starts to happen and my heart rate just keeps rising, even though I keep running slower. So that's one, okay? The other thing is fatigue. Fatigue is gonna set in. Now, for people who have been runners for a long time, it may not be such a big deal for you if you're running for an hour, no big deal. But if you're a beginner runner, or you're coming back off of an injury, or you haven't run for a while, then this could be a real factor. So being fatigued when you run, it will happen inevitably. Whether you're going longer than 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, even if you're running from like an hour and a half run, 2-hour run, 3-hour run, you will fatigue. And as you fatigue, your heart rate shows because you're just falling apart at the end of the day. So these are two things to really think about right off the hop. So dehydration and plasma volume loss, that's gonna happen. Even mild dehydration for prolonged exercise leads to a decrease in plasma volume, with less fluid circulating. The heart compensates by increasing its rate to sustain blood pressure and meet the body's demands. Now, you also have increased sympathetic activation, and this is the stress of prolonged exercise activates the sympathetic nervous system. This is the fight or flight response, which also contributes to elevated heart rate over time. How can runners manage cardiac drift? Well, the first thing is hydration. Got to stay hydrated. It's number one. Number two is you got to make sure that you're running in cooler temperatures. And if you're running in somewhere where it's hot, you may have to find a spot in the shade. You may have to run like early in the morning, or you may have to run late at night to kind of stay away from the hottest times of the day. Because prolonged exercise, your body is trying its best to cool itself by diverting where all the blood flow goes, right? It takes a bunch of blood, sends it to, close to the skin so you can start to cool, right? And so when it does that, you have less blood going through your system. Again, I'm no doctor, but as time continues, the amount of dehydration starts to thicken the blood, and it has to pump harder to get through, and so your heart rate starts to rise. So pacing yourself using low heart rate training can help with that, so you're not redlining it at both ends, right? Intensity is one thing, but heat is another. So if you're combining two of them together, then things are gonna blow up at some point, and you don't wanna have that happen. Now the other thing is overall fitness. As you get fitter, as time goes by, you will become a stronger runner. And when you become a stronger runner, the drift starts to drift further later on in the run. And that there is a great sign, because as you get fit, as you're able to run longer, it's a happy moment when it happens. Because again, I like to run longer, and this is what I've seen happen to me. As I run longer than an hour, I got to make sure that I'm staying hydrated, because if I don't, the drift becomes a real thing. And then you're like, well, what if I am running slow to kind of get away from the drift, but then I'm also my heart rate's still starting to rise. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little later in the video, but let's get on with a couple of other house cleaning things, so to speak. Now, there's a number of other factors that come into play when you're dealing with cardiac drift. And one of them you may not even think about, and it's the psychological toll that running has on you. Mental fatigue and an increased perception of effort over time can elevate sympathetic nervous system activity, the fight or flight response, which will also drive the heart rate higher even if the extended workload remains the same. Environmental humidity and pollution have an impact when it comes to cardiac drift as well. And the reason being, while temperature plays a major role, high humidity can further impact the body's ability to dissipate heat. Poor air quality or air pollution levels may also increase the strain on the body, indirectly contributing to cardiac drift, forcing a higher cardiovascular output to meet the oxygen demand. So if you live in Los Angeles and it's very polluted, like the air quality is not well, or if you're in an area where there's lots of forest fires and trying to get out for a run while all that smoke is kind of drifting into your area, again, these things will have an impact on your heart rate. Accumulated muscle fatigue, again, is also a very real thing. So as you run and you're running longer, you are putting a lot of strain on your muscles and they begin to fatigue. So this fatigue can lead to really some interesting changes in running mechanics, or a decrease in efficiency, in which turn forces the cardiovascular system to work harder, resulting in a gradual increase in heart rate. Medication and the food that you eat also play a big factor in these things. Now, if you are overweight, this can contribute to cardiac drift in ways that you wouldn't really think about. But what it does is the more weight that you have, it's an insulator. So it keeps us warm. So if the temperatures are hot outside, or if you dress in too big of a winter coat when you're going out to run, these things can contribute to a higher heart rate, because trying to cool yourself while you're all bundled up, I mean, you're running about 15 degrees warmer just by running. So if it's like 0 Celsius outside, it's actually 15 degrees. So if you're dressing for, 0 with your jacket and everything else, that's fine, but just know that you're gonna be a lot warmer on the tail end of your run as you warm up. Now, you're also gonna have increased energy expenditure, and that is a big factor, because the more weight that you have, the more harder that the body has to work to move you forward, to pump the blood through all of the veins and everything else. It has to pump harder. There's a lot more of me. And this is one of the things that I found. The more weight that I carried, the higher heart rate I had while I was trying to run. So again, these factors all come into play to trying to keep that heart rate low and at the same heart rate for a prolonged period of time. But you have all these factors all just chipping away at your heart rate. And it gets higher and higher and higher the longer you run. And you're like, I'm getting slower and slower and slower. So there's like this, I don't know, it's really hard to narrow it down. But again, I'm going to come back to that in a little bit in this video. So let's take an example. I'm going to take somebody who's 50 years old, who runs in zone 2, let's say 138 to 148, let's say. We'll take a weight of 225. We'll take the fact that they've been running for about, 9 years or so, on and off. We'll also say that this particular runner runs about 4 times a week, goes to the gym twice a week, one day to do upper body, one day to do lower body, but then doing core both days. And now let's say this runner is also a fasted runner in the morning. So it's been about 15 hours since they last ate. But again, they don't want to eat anything before they go out for a run. And then let's say they have about 2 cups of water about 30 minutes before their run. Now let's say that they're running in a location that's cold, right? Let's say New York, right? So let's say it's New York, it's cold. Let's say it could be Ohio, it could be cold. And let's say it's January to April. So you got some factors when it comes to temperature. And now let's say you want to push cardiac drift further along the line. What do you got to do? How do you make that happen so it doesn't happen right away? So here's some practical and honest recommendations if you want to be able to see improvements and push the drift further out, okay? And number 1 is boosting your hydration strategy. You may want to, bump that up. Maybe it's an hour before you go running. Maybe you drink a little bit more than what you're drinking right now. Or if you know that you're going out for a longer run, maybe you take water or electrolytes with you, right? Put it in a bottle and away you go. Maybe you don't drink it right away because you've just hydrated inside. But when you're out for a run, maybe you do it, after 20 minutes and then another 20 minutes, another 20 minutes, whatever it is. Maybe it's 200 mil. That's what, that's something that I've done. Now, again, if it's warmer, you got to make sure that you're on top of that because, it can get pretty crazy out there when the temperatures rise. Now, sometimes you may want to rethink about this whole idea of being out there, being a fasted runner, because your body will be fat adapted. Like you're trying to get your body fat adapted. Now, not everyone's going to be fat adapted because they haven't trained their body to be fat adapted. Right? We're always carb central. We're always carb eating throughout the whole entire day. So it's going to take a bit of time before your body knows how to burn fat very effectively. And so you could maybe have like half a banana, maybe a little bit of peanut butter, maybe a piece of toast, right? Have that maybe an hour before your run. Try it out. Everyone's different, right? Like I know what works for me, but everybody is going to be different when it comes to this. You have to kind of experiment. Just depends on how long you're running for, right? I know for me, it got to a point where I was so good at getting out for a run, being fasted for so long, that it really wasn't a big issue. But I've been experimenting this time around because I really wasn't having I was having success, but not the success that I wanted. So I've tried a few little things differently, and I've noticed a difference in my running. As weight comes off the body, a lot of things changes when it comes to running because you don't have to work so hard. That's why a lot of these runners that I see who are light, who are small, who are agile, and who are younger don't seem to have a lot of problems running slow. They tend to be running too fast. For me, I'm like, I'm running slow and I'm still having a little bit of a hard time. But that's okay because since I've started back in January, I've been running for basically about a month and a half now that I've been kind of back on it after a disastrous tail end of last year. But since I've done that, I've dropped about 13 pounds. Running slow, watching what I eat, what time of the day that I eat, just how I think about food has made such a big difference in my running and how I've been able to get a little bit faster over time. Look, even if you're running in zone 2, you need to make sure that there's certain things that's going on in your body. There's certain things that's going on in your body that you may not even know. And one of them is you want to prevent early fatigue. So I know some of us take a little bit of carbohydrates just to help the whole delaying the fatigue. And I've used that in a half marathon. You feel like you're just starting to fall apart. And clearly your body is in a mode of burning carbs because for whatever reason, the whole fat adaptation side is having a problem. You have a gel, boom, game changer. Everything is different. So again, in your training, you want to train your body to use fat as fuel. So that way it's not so hard in a race, right? So you can rely on fat burning to a degree, but you will have to take carbs because you are racing at a certain point. Not at the beginning of it, but maybe later on, right? The fatigue will set in. And when I was running my when I was running my ultra marathon, I was eating, what was I eating again? Potatoes and salt, and baby food in the squeeze packs. And that made a difference as I ran. Yes, for the majority of it, I was doing fine just with what was my body. I'm just burning fat. But there reached a point where I started needing to have these carbohydrates, and I needed the salt, and I needed everything else that I was fueling with. So yes, you're burning fat, but you also need to know that your body needs carbs as well. It's not just one and done. Your body's more complex than that. So now here is the big question. If you're using the Maffetone method or Zone 2 training, but you're testing yourself every month to see if you're getting faster, and that's where you just pick a route that you run every single month. Just run the same route at the same heart rate and see if you've gotten faster. And that's how you know if you're improving, if you're improving your aerobic fitness. So when you do the MAF test, it is a regular test that involves running a fixed route at your target heart rate and recording your pace and heart rate. And over time, if your aerobic system improves, your pace should be getting faster for the same heart rate. If it doesn't, it might be a sign of something is holding you back. Cardiac drift versus MAF pace. It's important to know what's going on. Now, cardiac drift is a normal thing like we've talked about at the beginning of the video. So if you remember, when cardiac drift kicks in, it could be after 30 minutes, it could be after 45, it could be after 60 minutes. Everyone's gonna be different. The temperature is gonna be different. How much you're drinking is gonna be different from every runner. So this will all happen to different runners at different times. And when it does, you need to understand that you will start to slow down. Now, if your MAF pace is slowing down while you're out on your run, there's a couple of things that may be going on. And one of them could be physical fatigue. It could be mental fatigue. It could include environmental factors, right? With temperature, with humidity. It could be the mental side that is starting to fail you. With your brain, you just can't think too clearly anymore. Your body's having a tough time switching because now your heart rate's starting to rise and you're like, whoa, I gotta run slower, and running slower is even harder. It's hard to run slow a lot of the time. So there are some things that you can do to minimize your cardiac drift while you're using the Maffetone method or Zone 2 or any aerobic training. There's a way to minimize that, okay? One of them is gradual warm-up. Most runners, I'm gonna say most runners, all the runners I know, they tend to skip the warm-up part before you go running. So your heart's not even in it yet. Your heart is not even in the game yet. Hasn't even started. Like you wake up, you're getting ready, you're just kind of dicking around, getting ready to get out for your run. And then, you just kind of walk out and then you're like, okay, let's go run. And there's no warm up. Your heart's not ready for it. Your body's not warmed up for it. Even if you're running slow, get out and walk. Walk, do some dynamic stretches, do some leg swings, back, side to side, front to back. Just limber up a little bit. This one goes without saying. Consistency. Consistency trumps everything when it comes to using the Maffetone method and building your aerobic base. As you are more consistent with your runs every single week, you'll start to see improvements that you haven't seen before. And you'd be like, wait a minute, this is actually kind of working. Now, in my training, for the last month and a half, I've been doing my best just to get out 3 days a week, sometimes 4. But that's all I needed because I am seeing results that I am so happy with that it's mind-blowing just to see the results. And I'm going to talk about that in another video. I'll talk about that in my next video. So if you want to see that, you certainly want to subscribe. You want to hit the bell notification, maybe comment below, and just give me a little bit about your feedback on how your training's going. Because what I'm about to share with you, I honestly thought it was going to be a number of months before I could get to that video that I'm going to talk about. So hold on for that one. So here's a question. So if MAF training really is just running until cardiac drift happens, then what about the whole mental fatigue aspect of it? Isn't that part of it as well? And can I get faster with running at the same low heart rate? But there's 4 points, right, that I will look at. One is controlled, one of them is controlled intensity. Number 2 is monitor the progress, and cardiac drift is a signal. Practical adjustments would need to be made as well. So if you keep these things in mind as you're running, that essentially is what MAF training is. Being able to run at a low heart rate, building your aerobic base, building its capacity, building your efficiency, right? Moving you to a improved direction, so that way you can start to add in some 80-20 and start running those faster, 20% runs, right? 80% slow, 20% faster, right? Tempo runs, maybe do some drills, things like that. It will lead you to that in time, not all at once, but in time. If you want to improve your running efficiency, which basically means, better oxygen use, better muscle adaptations, improved running technique, and delaying fatigue, who doesn't want that? That's wicked. That's awesome. But also, if you're building your aerobic capacity, what does that actually mean? Well, it means your cardiovascular improvement, your respiratory adaptations, muscle efficiency, enhanced endurance. Who doesn't want that? These are all good things. If you're a runner, these are the things that you want out of building an aerobic base. It gets you to becoming a faster runner to run those races that you want to run at. But you can't just do it all at once. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes dedication, it takes discipline. These are all the things that I'm going to say, sometimes I have to work really hard at remembering all of these things. Sometimes I just want to hack my way to just getting faster, in a month. That's just where I want to be. I want to start, doing something different, because maybe you get bored doing the same thing over and over again, but you got to stick with it. You got to stick with it. And I have to remind myself of this exact thing. So how's it going with you? How are things working out? I'd like to know. Now, if you want to know a little bit more in depth about the whole Maffetone training, watch this video here, because I think it'll help you take that training to the next level. Like I always say, get out and run. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.